Welcome to Washington in Focus Daily. It's Thursday, April 2nd, 2026. I'm Carleen Johnson, the Center Square Washington state government reporter. And it was a big day yesterday for two families who unwittingly found themselves in the center of the fight over the protection of girls' sports in Washington. And they finally got a chance on Wednesday to sit down with Superintendent of Public Instruction Chris Reykdal to tell their stories, their long battle in standing up in an effort to keep males out of girls' sports. Obviously, this is something that voters are going to weigh in on in the November election via a statewide initiative. So, this was a meeting nearly 2 months in the making. After we had an opportunity to meet with Superintendent Reykdal and asked him, straight up, are you going to meet with these girls? They had been hoping to meet with him. They had been out campaigning, showing up at rallies, different events, even went and appeared on the steps of the U.S. Supreme Court when arguments were coming up there back in January, saying, can we have a chance for you to hear our stories? We understand that OSPI, is standing up for the protection of trans athletes. But do you stand up for us? Do we matter? Are our voices being heard? So they had an opportunity, and you're going to hear the exclusive interview that I had an opportunity to sit down with Frances Stout and Annalie Wilson, their parents as well, who met up with Superintendent Reykdal on Wednesday. So you're going to hear their feedback, which they provided to us again exclusively about an hour after their meeting with Superintendent Reykdal on Wednesday. And then it seems a Washington state lawmaker who made an intentionally provocative comment on a piece of legislation that he was worried about um, cost him quite a bit, but ultimately may have paid off this week when it comes to protecting some of the most vulnerable in our state. This is a bill that Governor Ferguson signed this week, but then came back initially after that and issued a directive that basically acknowledged some of the concerns that were raised by Spokane Valley Senator Leonard Christian. And this has to do with the protection of developmentally disabled individuals in our state and developmentally disabled individuals that have committed sexual crimes in our state that are, kind of kept off into a separate protective class. This bill basically says everybody's going to get mainstreamed together. And it was Senator Christian who raised some very serious concerns about that. And when people weren't really paying attention to what he was saying, they used some provocative language on the Senate floor that may have gotten the attention of Governor Ferguson based on a directive that he issued after signing that bill this week. So let's dive in. About 2 months after Washington's Superintendent of Public Instruction, Chris Reykdal, told the Center Square he was willing to meet with two female athletes who have become the face of the effort to protect girls' sports in Washington, Reykdal made good on that statement. And he met with these young women and their parents on Wednesday. As previously reported, we've talked about how Reykdal has refused to comply with federal directives from the Trump administration to keep biological males out of girls' sports and out of girls' locker rooms and out of bathrooms in their middle and high schools. He has stated repeatedly there is no public evidence to back up that there are only two sexes, that there are only biological males and biological females, and that folks, however they identify, should be allowed into these spaces and should be allowed to compete in girls' sports. Of course, we have the initiative coming up on the ballot here in November where voters are going to have a chance to weigh in on how they feel about that. Now, when I had the opportunity to sit down with uh, OSPI's Reykdal, Chris Reykdal, in early February, I pressed the issue. I asked him why he had not met with these two young, brave women, Frances Stout and Annalie Wilson, who have, unwittingly become the center of this explosive issue. And this is what Superintendent Rachel told me back in early February.
I want to ask you, because the Republicans held the listening sessions on Tuesday on the two initiatives. I know I was told that you were invited and some other folks that are in opposition to the initiatives, but why did you opt not to go?
Well, I don't think we were invited to those, but
I was told your office was invited.
I think they did a general, they put a big thing, everyone come, but it was their rally.
Well, I'm not talking about the rally, but the listening sessions afterwards, which, because the bills aren't getting hearings, there were a lot of folks there. Might that have given you an opportunity to sort of hear from some of the folks that...
I've heard. We get lots of feedback from folks.
Okay.
And I've read the initiatives, and we're very familiar with them, and they're similar content of the initiatives prior and the testimony last year. Listen, these are going to the voters, which is, I think, what the sponsors wanted. They want these to go to the voters because they're confident they're going to pass. That's exactly what they're getting. And so they can keep fighting in the legislature whether to have hearings or not, but it doesn't change the fact that the voters know what's in these. And there's going to get ample time to look at all those. And there's going to be a vote on those and probably litigation. And so those have got their own path.
What about the two girls that have been most vocal in the movement? I know they've asked and called you out, like, we want to meet with you, sit down and hear our story, because they feel that they have been victimized in all of this. Have you considered meeting with them, or would you be willing to sit down with them and just hear their story? Because, they've had impacts because of the policies.
There's no role we have in trying to address what happened when one of them used a derogatory term or called out at somebody. Like, there's something that happened in a local school district that's the local school district figure out. I meet with students all the time on both sides of this. I'm happy to. I am not aware that they have said we would like to come meet with you or have a video call with you. I'm willing to do that.
Okay.
To listen, because I listen to everybody,
Right.
But it doesn't change the fact that there is an initiative out there that people are on both sides of, and the voters are going to get to decide, and then it's going to get litigated very likely.
Right.
So
fast forward to yesterday, the 1st of April, Wednesday, when 16-year-old Frances Stout, a student at Tumwater High School who sat out a game her freshman year when an 18-year-old biological male was on the opponent's team, and 16-year-old Annalie Wilson, a student at Eastmont High School in Wenatchee. She lost out to a biological male in an 8th grade track meet. She was really the first student to raise the voice in all of this. And along with their parents, they met with Superintendent Rachel in Tumwater on Wednesday. And it was the first time these families have had the opportunity to share their story with the superintendent, who has been openly critical of them, publicly critical of them. And Frances told me that one of her goals in the meeting on Wednesday was to get Rachel to say, "I'm sorry for suggesting that you used derogatory language about the biological male that you didn't want to compete against." And unfortunately, she did not get what she hoped for.
In a recent interview with you, I believe, he said that I used derogatory language. And because of that, I was investigated for harassment and bullying by Tumwater School District and the WIAA. And the words that I said that put me under this investigation and that he claimed were derogatory, which later I will get into more, but was, "You're a man." And that was seen as an issue in the eyes of these people. And I later asked him about it in this meeting, and he said that he did not read up fully on the situation, that he read it in the newspaper. Mm-hmm. And to have a state superintendent making these claims about me, at the time a 15-year-old girl, on public record, that I use derogatory language, that is awful to publicly say. And when I asked for an apology, he said that it would create more issues for him and I, and he wants to protect my safety. Mm-hmm. But when he says that I made derogatory language, does he think that that's protecting my safety? When he's saying that as a state superintendent of Washington, when he's saying that I, as a 15-year-old girl, made a derogatory comment, that isn't protecting my safety, and he said that he will think about it. And clearly he did not think about it when he made that comment about me in the first place. Because if we're thinking about things, he might want to think about what he says about me. because that wasn't right of him. And so I think if you're going to make these claims, and you might want to read up on the facts, and if you say that you read it in the newspaper and aren't completely sure of what happened, then I think you should be careful about going and saying that on a public platform about a 15-year-old girl who you're supposed to be protecting.
His like way out of everything was just that he has no power, no control over any of these issues, because this is the state law and he doesn't have power over that. But then later, when we were talking to him, he says that he does have some influence. So that's when we were confused, because he just admitted that he does have some influence over these laws, but he's just not doing anything. But he doesn't want to just say that. So his way out of every question was, I don't have control, I don't have power, we just follow state law. But later he admitted that he does have some authority, some power over, influence at least, over what is happening.
And with his little power that he claims to have, he's not at all supporting the girls. He's only supporting these transgender individuals. And so if he is saying that he has little power, he could use that power to protect the girls, and he's not doing that.
Now, Francis and Annalie's parents are mighty warriors for their girls in all of this, no matter where you come down on this issue of trans athletes competing in girls' sports. If you've got children, you know how fiercely you want to protect them. And so both girls' fathers are an example, maybe for many of us, of how to father our girls. And they made that clear in their conversation that they had with the superintendent on Wednesday. And one of them specifically didn't make any bones about the fact that he believes things are reaching critical mass with this issue.
There are some dads out there that want to take matters into their own hands. And it's not because of hate. It's not because of anything. It's because we have these precious daughters that we spend all of our time trying to tell them, lead with love, but be rational. And we see how they've been treated. And I've had a couple of times where I've wanted to go and have a talk with someone. I'll leave it at that.
Seeing her confusion initially in this first track meet that this happened, and seeing the hurt on her face and the kind of lack of understanding of what just happened, losing to a male, and not knowing it ahead of time, where maybe she would have made a choice to sit out like Francis did. She didn't have that choice. She didn't know ahead of time. And seeing her reaction to that, and then having a coach on another team hear her frustration speaking with her friends and tell her that if she's going to complain, she needs to go somewhere else. That was one of those moments that is like, as a dad, I'm like, okay, if someone's telling my daughter that she should be quiet about voicing her concerns, that's not going to happen. And there were many moments that I was like, you know what, I don't like to speak publicly. I don't like to make a big deal about things. Usually pretty quiet about stuff. But this was a moment that I knew I couldn't stand down and say, just going to let this go. And her courage inspired me to stand behind her.
Now, both families told me after meeting with Superintendent Rakedahl on Wednesday, they didn't get the sense that anything's really going to change based on the conversation they had. They did say several times he suggested that his hands are tied by state law. But at the same time, he is not willing to comply with federal directives from the Trump administration. And the families told me also that Superintendent Rakedahl suggested that he expects the pendulum is really swinging back the other direction toward protecting girls in sports. But he said Washington's really not there yet. So thinks we're going that way, but he's not willing to kind of insert himself in things at this point. Now, remember, there is that ballot initiative that's coming up in November that would protect girls' sports for only girls. The other initiative that will be on the ballot in November, also brought by Let's Go Washington, is the ballot initiative to restore the Parental Bill of Rights as it was before lawmakers came back and made some amendments basically to undo the Parental Bill of Rights. So again, those are both on the ballot in November. Much more to come on this, but I was so grateful to have a chance to sit down with those two families after that critical meeting with Superintendent Rakedahl on Wednesday, something they had hoped to have happen for well, more than a year and a half, the one family nearly 2 years that they'd been hoping to have a conversation with him. So I'm grateful to have played a hand in that, and grateful that they, are that strong in their fight moving forward on this. Now, earlier this week, Governor Bob Ferguson signed a bill that we have reported here on in Washington in Focus Daily. This is House Bill 1390. Now, this bill repeals the Community Protection Program and removes all the related statutory references. Now, the Developmental Disabilities Administration, according to this bill, has to develop and implement a plan to transmission all of these folks, CPP participants, Community Protection Program participants, into other services or program by the end of this year, with the goal of providing less restrictive options. Now, supporters say this is about sort of giving these people a fair shot. They've got developmental disabilities. Yes, they may have committed these sexually violent offenses. They may have shown a propensity to potentially commit further offenses, but that shouldn't keep them in confines and in such, restrictions. They should be more mainstream with other folks. Senator Leonard Christian of Spokane Valley shared with us that he found the intent of the bill was really to mainstream these people, but he was worried that doing so could be at the detriment of folks in the mainstream developmental disabilities community. And he said this bill was a recipe for disaster. So as this bill moved forward during this legislative session that ended in March, it wasn't getting the attention it deserved. He said he had offered amendments after amendment that were rejected in committee. Nobody was listening. So when he went to the Senate floor, he intentionally used the word, and he did so knowing that, some people find it offensive. He didn't do it, he said, to demean members of the developmental disabilities community. He did it because he knew it would get attention. And it did. It garnered him a reprimand from members of his own party. His Republican colleagues, especially in his own district in the Spokane area, came out and issued basically a reprimand and a condemnation that he would dare to use that word. Well, after the bill was passed this week, Governor Bob Ferguson then issued immediately a governor's directive that basically adopted some of the amendments that Senator Christian was calling for, and the whole reason why he used that language he did on the Senate floor.
He chose to sign it, but along with that signing, he put out a directive letter to Department of Social and Human Services, kind of directing them to do pretty much what was my major concerns, which was protecting these folks and getting them these individualized, IDEPs kind of thing for them, and making sure that they can be, and of course looking into the safety of moving them in with the other DD population. So the very things that we brought up as amendments in committee and on the floor, he ended up putting in a letter of directive. So for that, I really want to thank the governor for at least addressing those issues and of course, helping this community not be so victimized.
Now, when I followed up and spoke with Senator Christian on Wednesday evening this week, he shared again, he wanted to make sure people know I didn't push this, I didn't use that language to hurt anyone. And he shared also that he's gotten many people that have reached out from the developmentally disabled community that have said, thank you. Thank you for, using this word and making the stance you did, because people have now paid attention to this issue who otherwise would not have paid attention. So while he's got condemnation for many people, he's also gotten a lot of applause from the very community that he's hoped to help. He said he really did it so that people would understand what is truly at stake.
To be in this program, you had to be deemed highly likely to reoffend. So it isn't just because you did one bad act. it is you are deemed highly likely to reoffend. And that's how you got into this program in the first place. And so to just send those folks on to, the general population, the DD population, into, you know, uh, group homes with folks who really don't have any protection, or even the staff knowing where these, the history of these folks with a not only violent sexual past, but also a tendency to create, in going forward. So at least this, kind of directs, Department DSHS to actually go in and interview these folks and deem, if they're not, if they're still pose a danger, not move them in. Again, this is a very unique group. If these folks would not be DD themselves, they would probably be in prison. And so this was, the answer to them not being in prison, which wouldn't be fair to many of them anyway, because they really probably would not blend in with the general population of prison and not be able to be successful there. So, I mean, the program was designed out of the, concern that these folks are special as well, that they need help as well in that area. But you just can't end the one program and send them over to folks who don't have these tendencies and hope and pray everything works out. And I think the idea that we've had so many lawsuits in the state, and many of them coming from either, DHS or DCYF, that we just don't need to add more. And the reality was this was just rot for more lawsuits for the state.
So we may never know if, in fact, Governor Ferguson's directive that DSHS, make some accommodations for this bill are the result of Senator Christian's inflammatory or insensitive, whatever you want to call them, remarks on the Senate floor. We won't know if, in fact, that's why the governor issued this directive. Senator Christian is convinced that there is a correlation there. I want to share with you a couple of things that were in Governor Ferguson's directive on this legislation. One, he says it requires DSHS to provide individualized assessments for clients, including a risk assessment, prior to transitioning them out of CPP. The departments must consider safety of other residents and community when reviewing options. Clients will remain on a specialized caseload with low client to case manager ratios, and DSHS will track and review outcome data. So all of that, according to what Senator Christian told me just yesterday, is a win. And he says, if given an opportunity to go back, despite all of the condemnation he received and the public reprimands, even from his own party, to using that word on the Senate floor, he says, yeah, I'd do it all again, because he believes that the governor's directive on this is an acknowledgement that the concerns he raised were valid and important, potentially to, save people from real harms. So that is it for today's episode of Washington in Focus Daily for this Thursday, April the 2nd. As always, we thank you for watching. I hope you'll join us tomorrow. And also check out our stories at the Center Squares page on Washington. Again, have a great day.